Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Angel. Today's episode is going to be about building a JSON Rest API with Python and Flask, part 3. So in today's episode, we're going to continue the project that we have been building with Python and Flask. Today's we're going to incorporate the authentication part with JWT. So let's jump right into it. So what we're going to be doing today is, continue the previous project, talking a little bit about authentication versus authorization, because there are terms that usually they come together in every API or application. We're going to create a couple of users in our database and do the login flow, the login flow to the JSON Web Token, strategy. First, install pyjwt, generate a secret for generator tokens, create the login web service to generate the tokens for a user, and then create kind of like a middleware for authenticating users and calls using Flask. Actually, Flask doesn't broadly use the pattern of middlewares, just like other frameworks in other languages. They have like a couple of options to do that, like application context, request context, global objects, or global request objects, and also class-based views. In today's episode, we're gonna use a decorator pattern in order to validate that a user exists to be able to use a web service. Pending for other videos, we're gonna be talking about deployment and async and periodic task. That's pending. That's probably gonna be done next week. Some basic requirements: basic knowledge of Python to follow up, terminal, being able to use your IDE Python for Python, an HTTP client, I use Insomnia, a web browser, and a MongoDB database they already have set up. So let's start. First of all, authentication, plain and simple. Authentication is a strategy that you use to be able to identify who is the user that is making a request. Who's the identity of the user who's making the request, and specifically during that authentication, you can send back and forth information such as an authentication token, right? A good example of this is the JWT authentication token that we're going to be using today. For authorization, a little bit different. Authorization refers to giving a user what's he allowed to do or not to do within the platform or within the application, within the services, right? His exception always that also public web services where no user is required, so everybody's kind of like authorized. Some frameworks call this like anonymous users, but it's basically the same concept. Usually these things, this authorization schema, whatever strategy you use for your system, it constructs permissions, through or access to web service via permissions, via attributes, roles, or policies that you store in your database or in any other, storage. What do they have in common? They're both are broadly used for authenticating and validating permissions into web services. So today we're gonna see JWT and how to use it in your Flask Python API. Perfect. So let's jump to it. I have the Python project here, the one that we created last time. It has already the MongoDB connection. Pretty straightforward, pretty clean and neat. We're gonna do a couple of things, right? First of all, let me go to the project via terminal. Python. Let me enable the virtual environment, right? So we're gonna install a couple of libraries here for working. First of all, we're gonna move this URL that it contains a password to a .env file, right? If you are not familiarized with .env file, these are files where you put your secrets and password so that you don't commit it with your code to repositories, or if you're sharing in some other way code with your coworkers or your team. Use a mechanism to keep that isolated for you to protect it, right? In order for us to be able to use that .env, we could read the file, but it's easier to just install a library that reads the file for you. It's called python.env, and we're also going to use pyjwt, which is the library for generating tokens. Perfect. We install this, then we do pip freeze requirements just to update the requirements. Perfect. So in the .env file, we're gonna store the connection string for Mongo. I'm actually gonna copy the one that I used in the previous video, in the other video, just because it's the same connection. I didn't delete that database. So if you guys allow me to, I'm just gonna copy these two environment variables here, and I'm gonna put it in our project, right? The URI and the secret, which is gonna be used for signing the tokens, right? So now what we're gonna do is, instead of using this string, a couple things first. So first of all, for .env port load the, so that you can load the .env file and the variables. You can call that file whatever you want, but as a convention is use .env, so that's why it's not necessary to tell which file you're gonna be reading, right? That first. Once we read the environment file, the variables should be available in the environment from here. So I'm gonna say URI. So I'm just gonna print that just to run the application, right? So we're gonna run the application. Remember the command for doing this. We got our password here. We see that it's working, and then what we're gonna do is I'm gonna just say here from OS import environ, right? Over here, so that way we don't have to make it so long. And then this is gonna be the URI that is gonna be used here for connected to Mongo, right? Let's test that this is working. Shut this down. We run, it seems to be working, right? Let's check out our HTTP client. Let's go with Flask. I'm gonna rename this. Doesn't matter, right? So let's try to create task, right? Oh, we should have completed that. All right, because we did some validation here with Cerberus. So I'm gonna go ahead and add this file here, the completed ad. We probably should be start using it, right? This is gonna be more like a timestamp type of thing. So we send this, we're storing task already. Perfect. And if we do the get request, we're gonna get a bunch of tasks, right? Perfect. So we cross that from our list, right? I'm gonna move this up just to organize the routes a little bit. I'm gonna start organizing the code a little bit. So I'm gonna create a utils.py file so that I can move this serialize. Let's see, let's call this serialize Mongo ID, right? So I'm just gonna move this to utils, and whatever we're using here, I'm just gonna import that. Perfect. Now we're importing that from the utils package, right? Okay, first thing first, we're gonna do our login web service. So we create this here. We create a login route. I'm gonna call this login just to keep it consistent. It's gonna be a post, so only gonna receive the post. So I'm just gonna decorate this to allow only post requests, right? And what I'm gonna do is I get the data from here. For now, I'm just gonna print the data, right? I'm gonna be sending username and password. Maybe you log it in. Right, so let's test first that we have our web service there. So I'm just gonna duplicate this post request just because it's easier. Login, right? I'm gonna send email and password. I'm not gonna add any validation, just for now, it's just gonna be email and password. So if I send this to the login, if I post this to the login, we're gonna see it here, email and password, and the response. So we're gonna go to our database. We're gonna create one user. I believe that I create one already. So we go to the collections. We have a users collection. In the user, I have one that is called a la carte, just my email and my password. So I'm just gonna create a new one, right? I'm gonna create a new record. I'm gonna call this email. I'm gonna put my Yahoo account. What do you guys think? And it's a password, something simple, precisely something simple. So I'm gonna insert this. Searching document, now we have two documents. This is the database of our users. Keep in mind that whenever you're building a web application or a secure application, you don't wanna store passwords in plain text. Usually systems is a convention, everybody does it the same way. You hash the password that the user is setting up. That way, if you see it, you don't know which one it is, right? The majority of hashing algorithms that are used are basically, they convert a string into a scramble of numbers, letters, and or symbols, depending on the algorithm. And basically, what this does is that if you get the scramble or the hash, you cannot infer, or you cannot calculate the original password. So basically, when you get a request from a client, you take whatever they send, you hash it with the same algorithm, and then you compare if it's the same result. That way, you know if it's a password that that you store in the first place, right? So for now, we're just gonna do this. Just gonna copy and paste this email and password. Just gonna put the quotes here. Fine, we sending this. Perfect. Right now. Okay, so what we're gonna do is, or the procedure that we're gonna take is, we're gonna get our credentials, email and password. We're gonna find a record in our database that matches that email and password. And if we find one, we just generate a new JSON token and return it to the user. So if you're a user of an API, what you do when you log in is you receive your token and you store it somewhere, right? You put it in a cookie, you put it in the local storage, in the session storage, so that all the other requests you're gonna start doing from that point and forward, you send that token on a header. We're also gonna see how is the common way of sending an authentication token. It's usually by using the HTTP headers. So we get back here, right? We have the task collection. I believe that we put a different name, right? Tasks and users collections. So we're gonna rename this. This is gonna be tasks collection, and this is gonna be users collection. We change the variable name, right? So what we're gonna do, just like we did with the get one, right? We're gonna do a find one with the email and password. So let's just go ahead and copy this. Of course, we're gonna use the user collection instead of the. So we're gonna create here a variable filter. So we're gonna do email is gonna be data get. How do we do it here? Yep. Data get email. Oh, we're gonna do something first. We're gonna do this data. Just a small validation here. We get the email. If it doesn't have, we get none, right? Same thing with the password. So just a simple validation for, so we don't, do this so badly. If email is none or password is none, then we're gonna do an abort, right? Which is the Flask way of ending things. So we're just gonna do an abort, 400. I think the abort can take also like a message, a code, right? I think that for now the code, just to keep it simple, we'll work for it with a 400. So then the filter is gonna be email. We get the email here, then password, and then that's the filter that we're gonna send here, right? Okay, so yeah, we're gonna rename this just because filter is it's a word that can be confused. So we print the user, right? We're also gonna print the query filter, see if we are doing things the proper way, right? So easy. If the user is none, meaning that we didn't find any user, we just abort, right? In this case, we're gonna put like 401 or 404, like not found, right? If it is, if we find it, let's first do the finding and then we start talking about the token, because this is where it gets really cool. This is where we're gonna generate the token. So we send this 404 not found, 404 not found. So email and password. Let's see if we get in the correct filter. Yeah, email and password, something simple. Yep, let me see if it's working. Then we print the user, which is none. Let me see, query filter, users collection. Let me see if we're doing the proper collection here. If it's not a problem with the collection that we're using. So I'm just gonna use this user collection. And I'm just gonna print, just for debugging purposes. Just gonna make sure that I'm printing everything there. It's reloaded, bang. We print the filter, but there's nothing there to query, right? Probably I'm not using the proper name. Oh, let me switch databases. I think that we have a wrong name for the database. This should be called tasks database. So if we refresh this, we go at it again, then we find all the objects. Yes, that was my mistake there. So just gonna remove this debugging code here. I'm gonna remove the query filter. So fine, we're finding the user. Good. So now that we have the user, we know that the email and password, they match. We have a successful login, but now we need to create a token, right? So how do we do this? We use the JWT library that we just imported, that we just install from JWT import. We have the encode and decode, but just to make it a little bit more explicit, in this case, we need to be explicit. So what I'm gonna do is the token is gonna be used with this encode, right? With the encode, the first parameter that I'm gonna send is some data that I want to put inside the token, right? Remember that JWT tokens are useful also for sending data, right? So one thing that I'm gonna do is sanitize user. First of all, I'm gonna transform that Mongo ID into a string, right? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put here ID is gonna be sanitize user dot get So the is ID, right? Because this serialize converts this into the ID, right? And I'm going to send also the email. So I have the sanitized user get email, right? So I'm going to put that inside the token, right? Token that I'm going to generate. The second parameter here, it has to be the secret. Remember that we put a secret here? This is a long word, right? That you use to be able to encrypt, or you used to for the algorithm that is going to encrypt the payload, right? That way, when you want to validate the signature of that token, you use the same secret, and it tells you if it was generated with that secret or not. This is one way to avoid forgery, right? So I'm going to take this secret and burn. I'm going to use the get method. Secret, right? And finally, we don't have to explicitly set this, but we have to. It is a good idea to set the algorithm that the platform is going to use. I don't think that that's necessary, but you can choose between different strategies that the library has for generating that. You could also generate your token with a private key. That's also possible to get it even more secure. But for now, we're gonna use the default algorithms. So we go back to our web service, we put it in bang, we have our token. We already created our token. That's not necessary to be stored anywhere. This is safe for the user to manage. Is this a safe strategy? Actually, you can go to JWT.io, and it has a tool here for you to check your token. Right, it tells you like the algorithm that it was used for signing the token, and it tells you like the data that we put inside the token. Right, again, this works for reading what is inside the token, but it doesn't work for validate that the token is actually it was actually generated by you. That's going to be our next step, right? So great, we generated our token. Now any user can log into the system, and then what we're going to do now is we're going to create a decorator so that every time someone calls a route on the system, it first checks for the token, makes sure the token is valid, and then allows the user to execute the the view, or if it's not valid, it won't allow it, right? So let's first create that function, right? We're gonna call this decorators, right? Okay, so we have the decorators, right? Let me split it this side so we can see what we're doing here. So we're gonna first create a function, and then we're gonna transform it into a decorator, right? So first we're gonna use let's call it out decorator, right? For now, we're gonna set it that it's gonna receive a token, right? We'll go put some type hints. For now, it's not gonna return anything, right? So what we want to do is read from the request from Flask, import request, read from the request, right? The headers, because that's how we normally send a token to an API. So just to give you an idea, we grab this token. Let's say we're gonna authenticate this post request. I go to my headers. I create the authorization header, which is a standard. And then normally we use the word basic or bearer. There are 2 or 3 strategies that you can use, and then you place the token. For now and for simplicity, I'm just gonna omit this keyword, and I'm just gonna put the token plain, right? So you send this, we receive the token there, we make the validations and the transformation, and we decide we let the user pass or not, right? So for now, we're just gonna print here the headers, right? And just to do some, check here, some debugging here. Okay, so in order for us to test this, let's convert this into a decorator, right? I'm gonna call this original function, right? We define a function here called decorated function, which is gonna receive core args and args, right? We have to apply a decorator ourselves. It's called wrap original function, right? We have to import this from let me see, from phone tools, port wraps. So here we print the request and the headers. Remember, Flask uses some global objects too, like the request and the G. For now, we can do something like this. We're gonna access that on the view if necessary. And then we're just gonna return the original function being called with the same chords, keyword arguments, and line arguments, right? And then we're gonna return our decorated functions, right? So we got an error here. Oh, sorry. First of all, our parameters, and then there are name parameters, so, or keyword parameters. Okay, so this should be pretty straightforward. Then we add the auth decorator. Let's add it to the post, this task view, right? We add it first. It has to be the first, just because how Python applies the decorator goes from the innermost to the outermost, so the outermost have to be the route. So we have this, we'll paste it here. Okay, so let's see if everything is working. Then we go back here and we execute our post request. So once we execute our post request, the decorator works, right? And it prints all the headers that we have in our application, right? So what we want to do is pick up the authorization header. Let's say token, right? We're gonna go ahead and do request.headers.get. We're gonna use this keyword authorization, right? Let's also print this, just to make sure that we're doing it correctly. I believe the header is a dictionary, so we can pass a default value. So simple, right? If token is none, or better, is not none, right? We can enable this, just to always put the user as none. But if it's not none, right, what we're gonna do is validate if we actually were the ones who generated that token, if that token is actually something that we did. So what I'm gonna do is import the same library that we were using, and it has also a similar function called decode, right, that it takes the token and it takes the secret that we use to generate tokens, and it's gonna tell you whether it's a valid token or not. So we import Embryon, right? This could generate multiple errors. For now, we're just gonna keep it simple, right? So basically, if we get a successful payload, right, we're gonna print it just for debugging purposes, and then we're gonna use g.user equals payload. All right, let's see if this works. We go ahead, we send it, we got an error, decode error. Oh, it is required for you to send the algorithm, right? So we can figure out from here, right? This was the algorithm that was used for decoding this. Let's set it out in an explicit way. Right, and let's use this same keyword and put it here. I believe that this should work unless we have to like regenerate the token. So you refresh, send, invalid algorithm is not allowed. Let me just check that I'm spelling correctly the name of the algorithm. Let's see, I think it's because it's just a name keyword. This should be the name of the algorithm. So let's see how this function works. Called decode, token, the key, and the algorithms. So it's a list of algorithms. So it should be plural and like this, if I'm not mistaken. See? Okay, now it works, right? So now we get the token, we print it, right? We print the payload that was decoded and everything seems to be going all right. Notice that if I change this token, I just add like a 1 here, it's just gonna fail all over the place. It's just gonna say invalid, token. You can also there's a standard for adding an expiration date for the token. That way, when the decoding function checks that expiration date, and if it's already expired, it's just gonna tell you it's not a valid token, right? For now, it's just a valid token, right? So first, let's remove all these prints. Right now we have our auth decorator. So basically, we can also access this G object. That is the one that we're using for. It's kind of like a global object in the request. That's what we're using for storing like contextual information. Again, you cannot change the request object. It's not like a recommended pattern for Flask. They actually provide that global object for you to do this type of stuff. So if we get here, simply we print the g.user to see if we actually have a user, right? Remember that if this doesn't work, or if we don't send a token, it's just no user there. And we're gonna keep printing none, right? For now, we do have a user. Let's say that I choose to not to send a token, right? If I send this, it should be none. Perfect, right? I'm gonna send the token. I have the user there. So from here, it's pretty straightforward, right? So if g.user, I know that it's there because I have the decorator, right? If g.user is none, abort. 403, permission denied, right? Let's test this. I send this, it should work. I should be able to create my task without any problems. And if I choose not to send this, boom, 403, forbidden. Now I have this protected. I could also, use a decorator here. It's also a good pattern, like a login required type of thing, type of decorator. Is very common in Django or Flask. But for now, let's keep it explicit so that we can, easily see what we're doing, right? So we got the out decorator. I'm gonna use it everywhere. Well, we only had 2 views, and I'm just gonna also protect this view from undesired access, right? So if we're gonna get the GET request, we're gonna get hit by a forbidden. Why? Because we need to copy this header, put it here, put it on the headers, authorization header, the value, we send it, boom, now we can access our web service. Now we password protected or token protected or all web service. Now the user will have to be identified using a token on the headers in order to use our API, right? That's perfect. We didn't cover anything regarding permissions. For now, it's just, are you a valid user or you're not? We can do that in other conversations and further videos. For now, I think that we have it covered. One thing before we push everything to GitHub, just guys, if you're enjoying this content, make sure to hit the like button and the subscribe. Leave any comments regarding this video or anything else that you want to see in the channel, and make sure to share this with someone who you think that this information could be really useful. Thanks for watching.